All right, welcome everybody. Good morning, good evening. Welcome to our fireside chat today with Mourshed. I'm Rania Sikkar, one of the founders of Jusoor. And as many of you know, Jusoor is a global nonprofit focused on investing in Syria's youth for a brighter tomorrow. I'm unbelievably excited about the hour we're about to spend together. And it's because this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. We're going to spend the next hour together talking about how we as individuals have the opportunity to make a tremendous difference on some of the world's most pressing problems. And our world has so many pressing problems today, whether it's inequality or racial injustice or global poverty or wars that we see happening around the world. There are so many matters that need our attention. And sometimes you step back and look at these issues and think, there is no way I can make a difference. This issue is so big. How can I, as an individual, make a difference? And in the next hour, you're going to hear about all the different ways you can make a difference. And hopefully you'll all walk out feeling incredibly empowered to make a difference in the world around you. Just in my own story, I've had the opportunity to do that through Jusoor and this organization. And as many of you know, my family is Syrian. And so Syria is a place that's really important, to me. And the opportunity, the area that I'm especially passionate about is opportunity creation for people in Syria and around the world. And I've had the opportunity to make a difference on that through Jusoor. And it's been amazing to me over the course of the last decade that as the war in Syria has gotten more and more depressing, my worldview about what's happening in Syria is in so many ways encouraging and positive because I get to interact with so many of you and to see how you guys can change the world around you. And so I've learned a lot around how we as individuals can make a tremendous difference. And there's nobody better poised and positioned to help us understand that than Mourshed, who's our guest speaker today. So let me tell you a little bit about Muna, and then we are going to spend the next 30 minutes exchanging thoughts and perspectives. And then we'll open it up for all of you to ask questions in the Q&A function, which I'll share more about in just a moment. So Muna has dedicated her career to ensuring that every individual gets a quality education and a quality job. Just think about that for a minute. It's an incredible mission. And so she got her undergraduate degree from Stanford in development studies and her PhD from MIT, also in economic development. And she began her career in 1999 in McKinsey's Dubai office. She and I met at that office a few years later when I joined that office. And I've been able to watch Muna for over 2 decades, making an incredible impact on these causes. So she started her career there as a founding member in that office and very much shaped the work that McKinsey did in the office, which has gone on to have absolutely tremendous impact in the Arab world's development. In 2007, she founded McKinsey's global education practice. So this is after she identified this as a personal passion for herself that she was deeply committed to. She led McKinsey around the world in investing in studies and research that helped explain why certain education systems were high performing or fast improving, and began to study the link between education and employment. And so that became a major focus of her work over a decade. And in 2014, she took it to the next level and founded a nonprofit called Generationorg, which is focused and committed on helping train learners of all ages to help them achieve careers and outcomes that were far beyond their initial expectations. And so she's been having unbelievable impact in that context. And she's the CEO of Generationorg today, and will share a lot of her work and her journey with us over the course of the next hour. So before we get started, here's what we're going to do. As I said, we'll have about a 30-minute Q&A. And in that time, would invite all of you to ask your questions so we can have Muna answer them at the end of our conversation. And so you'll be able to ask those questions in the Q&A function in the webinar. And then all of you can upvote those questions so that at the end we can start with the highest voted questions and go through those. So excited to hear your questions as we work through this conversation. So with that, welcome, Muna. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Well, thank you. It is wonderful to be here. And thank you so much for the invitation to meet your community.
Oh, so excited to have you. I couldn't think of somebody who will inspire all of us more. And frankly, I know I'm going to walk away with new inspiration after our discussion today. So Muna, I thought you could start by sharing a little bit about the work that Generationorg is doing.
Absolutely. So we began our work 6 years ago, as Rania just mentioned. And what we do is recruit, train, and place learners into careers that would otherwise be beyond their reach. And so our entire focus is on how do you break bias barriers, so whether it's about supporting females to get into jobs that are male dominated, whether it's supporting people of color to enter into professions where there is very low representation, whether it is supporting special needs populations to be able to access opportunity. That's what we do. So we are now live in 14 countries. We've had 40,000 graduates across 30 professions. We have an 83% job placement rate, and our graduates are earning 3 to 4 times in income what they would have had prior. And we recently, although our initial focus was youth, very much inspired by work that I've been doing in the Middle East prior to Generation, we have also now expanded to what we call our regeneration population. So this is the population in their 40s and 50s who are losing their jobs due to automation, digitization, now the pandemic. And so we are also providing services to them as well.
I mean, this work is incredibly important, as we all know today, and it's incredible. It's unbelievable because you've been doing this work since 2014, and it's become the biggest, most important issue of the day today.
Aside from the vaccine rollout, but
vaccine rollout, but in many ways, the importance of this work has been heightened by what we've seen in COVID, as inequality has risen and become even a bigger issue for us. And so
it's the second pandemic, absolutely.
Pandemic. What inspired you to make this your cause, Mona? Employment to education. You worked on a lot of things. I'm sure when you started off your career, this wasn't top of mind for you. What made this the cause that you wanted to dedicate your career and time to?
So you're right. I did not initially think I was going to be working in the employment space. So my very first passion was around education. And the reason for that was just, it's played such an important role in the life of my family, as I'm sure it has for many in this community as well, right? Because education is what catapults you through adversity. It catapults you into opportunity. And so I was very focused on wanting to work in education. And so I started with a focus on schools. So I spent a lot of time working on literacy and numeracy with school systems. And then I was realizing that once they graduated, they were not fine, right? They, even if for those who went on to university, they weren't getting jobs afterwards. And for the many that weren't going on to university, they were struggling with unemployment. And so then I sort of went up the chain, if you will, to the education to employment arena. And that started at around the time of the Arab Spring, actually. We had been studying just the mass unemployment that we see in the region, and how that frustration of not being able to access opportunity results in just tragedy for families, for society, for communities. And then looking more broadly, following the Arab Spring, then was the whole Occupy movement across the world, where you also were seeing youth uprisings because of lack of opportunity. And so that was when the idea began to percolate of there's something here. And as we looked across the landscape of employment programs, we found that many of them focus on training alone. Not so many focus on training and placing you in a job. And for those that do focus on training you and placing you in a job, they tend to be in a single country. They tend to only have hundreds of graduates per year. The largest would be in the low thousands per year. And they tend to be expensive. And so that was where the idea for Generation came from. So could we create something that would be cross-country, fully global, and be able to support initially, tens of thousands and ultimately hundreds of thousands, if not more, on an annual basis. And now this is because of the pandemic. I mean, this is absolutely, if ever there was a time for an effort like this is the moment for it.
This is the moment for it. And it's a top of mind issue for policymakers and frankly, even CEOs and companies around the world. What have you learned along the way about how you can scale solutions here? This is a really hard problem to solve, and people have been at it for a long time trying to figure it out. And I can imagine that you could find ways to make a difference on small scale. How do you figure out, what have you learned about what it's going to take to scale this? What makes it most challenging, and what will work to scale solutions in this space?
That's a great question. Yes, it is hard. Right. What makes it, let me just talk about what makes it hard and then talk about what we've learned along the way. What makes it hard is that you have to bring together into an integrated package a set of things that have traditionally been very fragmented, right? So if you look at the workforce landscape, there are those that focus on training. There are those that focus on job matching. There are those that focus on mentorship. And so it's lots of fragmented solutions exist. And so what we were trying to do is to bring together the entire chain of, we will pre-confirm job vacancies with employers. Then we will recruit you, and then we will train you. We will also provide you with social support services. We're also going to then match you to the job, and we're going to be tracking you afterwards, and with your employer to see that there's a return on investment. And then data is going to make all of this thing go better, right? So by its nature, it's intense, because it needs to be for the populations that we're seeking to serve. So just to be clear, like, we are seeking to serve those who face the greatest systemic barriers in whichever country we're in. And so that's what makes it hard. So what have we learned? So in the first couple of years, we started in 5 countries. So US, Spain, India, Mexico, and Kenya. And we very deliberately wanted different challenges, or in different contexts. And, initially it was, okay, how do we get learners to know about us, right? That was the big thing. How do you get people to apply? And then it became, okay, now people are applying. How do we get enough jobs? And then it became,
problem in many ways.
yes, it is a two-sided problem, right? And then how do we make sure that in every generation classroom, we are delivering the same quality experience for every person everywhere, right? And so on, right? And and then it became, okay, and now we have different learner profiles. And so with each phase, there's been a different challenge, if you will. And now it's like, and how do you dramatically accelerate it? So even now, we had been a largely in-person program. And then there was that fateful weekend in March where overnight, everyone was online over Zoom, but now we've actually created programs from scratch to be delivered online. And so that's, that in and of itself is an experiment. But what I would say about how do you scale something is really 2 things. I mean, one is that you just have to get going and be very alert to data and to the interventions you're trying and how you need to change them. So we would literally turn on a dime from cohort to cohort based on the data we were seeing about whether recruiting was going well, or whether students were learning, or whether they were getting placed in jobs, or the feedback of them, whatever it was. And so you have to be very ready to make very fast changes. And then the second thing is, look, there is no nonprofit, even a group of nonprofits, that will ever be able to scale to the size that can actually change an entire system. The only way that happens is if you embed the practices of the nonprofit inside governments, right? So inside technical vocational providers, or leveraging fund flows. And so that's really what we're trying to do right now, right? You need to scale to a certain point so that it's clear that this works and that it happens and it works in different contexts. But then you have to think about how you embed in actual systems and processes of public workforce systems, because otherwise you'll never get enough people who are able to benefit from this kind of an approach.
I just want to reflect on one thing you said, and then I have a follow-up question. You said just get going, just get started. And I, from my experience, have learned that that is an invaluable just piece of advice. And so I just want people who are listening to just pick up on that. You know, in Jusoor, I remember when we started with our schools in Lebanon, we knew that we wanted to help the refugee crisis in Lebanon, and we knew there was this massive group of young children who were out of school and not being educated. And we had all these hypotheses around how we were going to get in and intervene and how we could make a difference. But you know, you can imagine when you start something like that, you're almost in a state of paralysis where you're taking in all these ideas and you have no idea which one is going to go in which direction and which is going to work. And so that concept of get going, and you also talked about experimenting, getting in there and running an experiment, and then evaluating the data and pivoting quickly. And for those who remember Jusoor, our first experiment was sending a bunch of volunteers who had no education background to teach refugee kids who'd never been in school how to read and write. You can imagine how that experiment went. But since then, we've been recognized as a top school and informal education system in Lebanon. So we started with a crazy idea, but we evolved quite a bit to get to somewhere quite strong. And so I just want to encourage people to pick up on that point that you raised.
So that's a great example, wonderful example. And both you and I have had a mentor who told us never lose the good in pursuit of the perfect, right? Yeah. And that has always stuck with me. Yeah. Right? It's just don't do things that are like clearly off the wall, but just whatever is your best thought of what needs to be done, just get out there and start doing it, and then make it better. Commit to making it better really quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And those in the private sector know that as we build software and technology, we do the same thing. We put a crazy MVP out there and learn from customers. So incredible life lesson there. Muna, you mentioned that to take scale to the next level, what you're now doing is trying to build those connections with the public sector and with government institutions. As many on this call over the course of their career will do work in the nonprofit sector and want to get to that scale. Tell us about strategies and approaches there and what you're learning as you're trying to make that happen.
Yeah, so we work with an array of governments, and first thing is the outcomes of employment, actually even graduation, employment, income gain, job retention. These are often things that are not measured in many public workforce systems today. And so you actually have to start with a baseline, like actually working to help create a baseline of where are we, so that we can then measure like how are we doing against that. And then the second thing is, there are two ways to work, at least for us, to work with the system. One is to actually embed ourselves inside technical vocational institutions, which means working with side by side with the instructors or with the administrators to deploy our 7-step methodology and to tropicalize it for whichever country we are in. And so that's the second piece. The other way is through the funding flows. So we get funded by public workforce systems to be able to deliver a set of outcomes. And for we walk into this knowing it is hard, right? It's easier for us to run our own programs. Of course it would be, but that would never be able to reach hundreds of thousands, let alone millions of people. And so if that's the goal, you have to figure out how you're going to fit into the ecosystem as opposed to try to create something parallel to the ecosystem, is our belief. And so there is a part of me that, frequently now is just like when I speak with various stakeholders, it's like, stop telling us to scale. Us scaling is not going to solve this. Us embedding in government will help solve this, but not ourselves getting bigger, bigger, bigger. And so that's very much a part of our ethos. And I think it was really about 18 months ago that we had this view that to be a real system change agent, you have to find a different way to work with the system.
Very, very powerful. And so this question of how do you continuously scale your impact, not every year adding marginally better impact, but how do you take it to the 10x impact level year after year? And how do you think about different levers you can pull? And in your case, it's about partnerships. How do you think about those partnerships that are going to take you to the next level of growth? What else have you learned in your time leading a nonprofit? As you give advice to others who want to found a nonprofit and build a high impact at scale nonprofit, what are the lessons you've learned over time about what it takes to do that?
Oh, so many. So very good, great set of questions, Rania. You're doing great at the facilitation.
Asking what I'm interested in. I'm learning a lot.
So look, when you are starting up a nonprofit, you have to be really clear about where your effort fits into the broader landscape of the service you're providing, right? So there are, there are many, many, many nonprofits across the world, right? And so how do you make sure that what you're offering is distinctive, is adding value, like not imitating what others are, clearly understanding and appreciating all the other nonprofits that are in the space, but you have to be really clear about why does it matter for you to be here? Because otherwise you should just go and join another nonprofit that's doing what you want to do, right? So like, what's the special thing that you're bringing to the table? The second piece is just, you need great leaders, right? You need to be able to work with a set of people who are as mission driven as what you aspire to achieve, and who every day are going to go the last mile. Because the thing is, as your nonprofit grows, you're never going to be in every corner of it. You're never going to have visibility of every piece of it. And it's your leaders who are going to see things and create opportunities in ways that you wouldn't have even imagined. So it matters the people that you surround yourself with, so the team. The third thing I'd say is, and you have to have great results, right? So whatever it is you choose to do, it is fine to fail as you pilot and experiment things. And I'm a big believer that if something is painful, you had best have learned from it, right? But at some point, you also have to have gotten sufficient traction through measurable outcomes that people can look at and say, okay, wow, this is actually different than what we usually experience. Because that is what's going to support you to get funders. That is what's going to support you to get the partnerships. That is what's going to support you to really be able to have the impact that you want to have. And then once you get to a certain size, then you have to think about, how do you make sure that everyone can spread their wings and fly, right? It's real, like, the way nonprofits get better isn't because they keep doing the same thing. I mean, we had an experience with during the pandemic where we decided in February that we were going to support the training of healthcare workers in COVID-19 practices, right? So how they treat COVID-19 patients and how they stay safe themselves. That was never something that we thought about doing, really. Like, that was never on our horizon. But our country leader in Italy, which obviously was one of the first hard-hit countries with the pandemic, he saw an opportunity, right? He saw an opportunity, and he came to us and said, what, we are great at curriculum and instruction. What if we deploy that? And as we studied it, we saw, what, the guidance for healthcare workers on how to use ventilator. I mean, it's the skills that an ICU nurse typically has. Now all nurses need to have this skill, and the guidance is in PowerPoints and in people talking through PowerPoint slides on video, right? But what they really need is practicum experience. Like, how do you actually put on the people? What happens when there's a tear? Like really just practical stuff. And so we created a set of modules, and then we did that in 5 other countries. And now we've supported 300 healthcare workers across 5 countries to be able to, with these skills. And you have to have an environment that enables anyone in the organization to see an opportunity and to raise it, and for us to be able to just pivot in order to move in that direction, because it's going to further the impact. So those are just some of the things that I have learned along the way. And I am still learning, just to be very clear. I do not consider myself a master yet. There is still a lot more that I need to learn in this journey myself.
Well, given the constant increase in growth you guys are having, I'm confident you're going to be learning all the time, because the scale and the ambition of what you're doing is getting bigger every year. And so the challenges will be new every year, given where you're taking the organization. A couple of things you shared that really struck me. One is this the culture that you establish in an organization is so important to the ultimate success of the organization. And those are choices you make as you lead an organization to establish that culture. But you talked about one, how you all responded to COVID must have just been so inspiring for the organization, because it demonstrated how close you were to your end customers and how purpose driven and mission driven your team is, that they saw an opportunity and felt such a need to take action, and then they were empowered to make it happen. And so those are components of a culture that make an organization incredibly strong, but it takes work for a leader to establish that culture and let it flourish. Sometimes it comes bottoms up, but to let it flourish. You also said another thing, which I think is so important. It's about the talent you surround yourself with. And that, for me as a leader, I spend most of my time in the private sector and also time with Jusoor. That lesson is the most important lesson ever. You are so strong when you bring diverse minds around you that look at the world differently, that think about the world differently, that push you in different directions, and can take an idea and make it incredible. And sometimes in the nonprofit sector, it's harder to recruit that talent. So I'm sure you work unbelievably hard to get talent there, but I'm also sure you have one of the world's best teams around you. And so it's just a reminder to all of us, no matter what sector you're in, how much you need to invest in that, because it makes all the difference to what you're able to achieve.
100%. Totally agree.
So one more question for you on generation before we move on and switch topics. To what extent are you working in the Arab world? And you know the Arab world incredibly well, given all the work you've done. What is your point of view on the opportunities around education to employment in that region?
So first, we are not currently in the region. We had been working in the UAE, but due to the pandemic, we had to suspend our operations. I will, though, say the seed of the generation idea came directly out of spending time in the region. I very much want us to work in the region. It's if I just take a step back, so in 2011, so 2010, 2011, as we were reflecting, what we saw in the region was youth unemployment rates of 40 to 50%, depending on what country you were looking at. We were also seeing employers saying, well, I can't find the talent I need for even entry-level positions. And the juxtaposition of these two facts is just tragic, right? And that has likely even accentuated due to the pandemic as well. So the challenge in the region is, in my mind, is really twofold. There is one part, which is there truly is a fundamental disconnect between professions and skills that are being taught in the education system and what employers are demanding. And of course, there are multiple efforts to try to create that bridge. There are also nonprofits that are seeking to create that bridge. But there is not yet a systemic solution for that. So that is one piece of it. I think there's another piece, which is, on the employer side, there has to be enough of a pain point. So one thing that we've really learned from Generation is that unless employers experience a real pain, either in scarcity, so you want 100 Java front-end develop, whatever it is, but you can only find 10. Or you are experiencing high levels of churn, so people leave you after 3 to 6 months, and so you stop investing. Or it could be massive levels of productivity quality variation. Unless there is a true pain point, employers do not behave differently. Mm-hmm. We can talk about it as much as we want, but you will not get a fundamental shift in performance. And so there is a dual responsibility here, right? There is both, how do employers engage differently if there truly is a pain point that they are looking to solve? And there is, how do we also support learners in very different ways than what we do today, so that they get much more of this holistic package of what I was describing earlier. And we also need governments who are going to be sufficiently focused on this issue that they want to change the practices in a very fundamental way. of the workforce system. So those are the ingredients that are required to get the type of shift that the region very much needs. So I have the aspiration that we work in the region, truly, truly do. And it's something that we will be looking at as we think about the next set of countries that we expand to.
Makes a lot of sense. There's some pretty big systemic barriers that the conditions aren't yet right for the business, for the model that you've created with Generation to have the impact that you'd like to see in the Arab world. But I'm sure they will be over time as the generation evolves. Yeah, great. I wanted to turn to a few other questions before we open it up to the group. The next topic I have for you, Mona, is hearing a little bit more about the journey you took to get where you are. I have found in my own career that I learned a lot about myself in each job I took on and what made me tick and what motivated me. And I have found that going through that process is one of the most important things a young person can do and think about to get to a place of high impact and high satisfaction in their career. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your journey and your learnings over time that got you to the reflections and realizations. You know, you shared some of them, but what else would you share about that journey that got you where you are today?
Yeah, I fully agree with you, Rania, in terms of what you say about how you learn about yourself as you take on new challenges and new roles. You know, so I went from being a PhD student to joining a global consultancy, McKinsey. And I remember feeling like my opinion that I didn't have a worthwhile opinion, right? You know, I distinctly remember sitting in meetings thinking, you know, all these people have these really strong opinions and I don't seem to have one. What's going on? What's wrong with me?
I can't imagine you not having a strong opinion, Mona.
Well, so you say that now, but that's not where we started.
Yeah, I know.
Right. And then like for me, what was really fundamental to shifting that was content, right? You know, so I started to get really deep into certain content area, you know, so education, obviously, through the research we were doing. And that, you know, that base of knowledge helped me to feel stronger about opinions that I had. And then even then outside of education, I then felt like, okay, I've got pattern recognition now. I can offer a view and so on. You know, but that was, you know, I would say that in the first quarter of my working career, like that was the big shift, right? After that, it became, you know, how do I be a good mentor and supporter to others, right? You know, so you spend the first part of your career, I think, just very much focused on how do I, you know, achieve something, whatever that is, right? And then as you become a team leader, you then realize, you know what, you know, I'm only going to be successful if all of us are successful, and I need to now think about other people and how to and how to support them in whatever it is that they need, right? You know, and so that's then the next journey. The third journey was then really about creation, right? Like how to create something from scratch, and how and what it takes to do that, right? Because you can have all the opinions you want, you can have a great team, but it doesn't mean you're going to actually build something new. You know, there's I've always, you know, like there are some people who are brilliant at building things. There are some people brilliant at managing things. And you need to have a very clear view about which of these you are as you think about what you then do in your career. But those are some of the other things that I've learned along the way. What have you learned?
So many things. You know, I had a lot of questions along the way about where I would get energy. And early in my career, I found myself following the normal paths. You know, and I was very driven by this is the best thing I can put on my resume, so I'm going to go do that. So I graduated from college and went to Wall Street and was an investment banker. And that was probably one of the best decisions I made because it made me very, I could handle any challenge, and I became great at probably an area where I was not as strong at, which is rigor and numbers and all of that. But so it was great foundation, but I learned a lot about myself and that I just wasn't passionate about that work. And it felt like I was just shifting money around from one spreadsheet to another, and I couldn't see tangible value creation. So when I went to Dubai, it was and worked at McKinsey with all of you. That was one of the most meaningful experiences in my life. It was something I did on a whim. And so what I learned is early in your career, you need to do very diverse things. You need to try different things to start to understand what makes you tick. And I learned when I went there that I was really motivated by opportunity creation, and I could find a way to be in the private sector and affect outcomes that I cared about in a very efficient way. I learned I really cared about efficient ways to impact things. And so that became a thread I took on in my life after that, which is I wanted to stay connected to the Arab world. I then went back to grad school, and that was wonderful too, because I got a break. And actually, one of the people we worked with in Dubai told me to go to fashion design for grad school. And I was flabbergasted and very offended at the time, but it was the best advice ever. I didn't do that. I should have done that. I went on to do an MBA and a degree in economic development. But that advice was great because it was pushing on do something diverse, think about the world differently. You accumulate all these diverse perspectives on the world and you become a great leader because you put them together and you think about the world differently. But in the end, the themes that I have developed and figured out over time is I care a lot about the Arab world and I care a lot about opportunity creation. But I want to do it through the private sector in many ways because I love the energy and speed of the private sector. And so I was able to work with a bunch of people to create Jusoor, which is the thing that gives me motivation and just spirit and it just accelerates my pace and energy because of the work we're doing and hope. And so I spend a lot of time on that. And in the private sector, I was at Google for a while doing really getting to be part of an incredible company, but working on video and media. And that wasn't my calling. And so now at Intuit, I work on powering small businesses through helping them manage their money, access capital, and increase survival rates. And so that is very meaningful. And so, and I've learned that I love to build teams rather than consult. So I had to try all these things and do all those things, but there was a lot of perspectives and points of view along the way.
That's fantastic. You've been on a very rich journey.
Yeah, I mean, many of us have, but it's been rewarding. Mona, last question from my side. What is the advice you would give to young people on this call as they think about where they are in their, starting their careers and wanting to have, impact in the world around them?
Well, actually, in the Q&A, there is a question about what advice do you give to youth suffering from unemployment? So
we can merge them.
Yeah, so I'll offer thoughts for those who are employed and unemployed. How about that? Look, for those who are employed, find what you love, right? So to Ranya's point, you try many different things and, you will very quickly know whether you are into it or whether you are not into it. And if you're not into it, keep hunting, right? Because true joy in your work is when you have a full overlap of your professional life and your heart. And then it's not work at all. It's about fulfilling a life mission. It's about fulfilling purpose. And so that's my greatest advice to someone who is employed. I also have that advice to those who are unemployed. But let me also just give some advice as to how to get employed first. Right. So for someone who is unemployed, the odds of a successful employment outcome are much higher when you have a very clear profession in your mind that you are trying to get into. And so whether that is something that you studied for or didn't, doesn't actually matter. I mean, what we found with Generation is that within 12 weeks, a maximum of 12 weeks, we have shorter our programs are anywhere from 4 to 12 weeks, depending on the profession. And we work across 30 of them. If irrespective of what you studied, have a view about which profession you are interested in and then get yourself on a path to get into it. And in some cases, you will need to do training before you can begin applying for the job. In which case, please, please, please find a program that will train and place you and not just train you. A second thing is make sure that you are scanning actual different professions and understand what they are out there. Because what I often find is that you don't know what you don't know. right? So I have for example, in Spain, we have a program on robotics process automation. And I remember one of our recruits who was in tourism. She studied tourism, and she's like, what's robotics process like? What is, like, I've never heard of this thing. What is it? So just have a very open mind about what professions are out there. Take the time to look at what you need to do well in order to be able to be successful in any given profession. But that will help significantly, both in terms of speed and in terms of employment outcome. So I see we have more questions now in the Q&A.
Yes. Do you want to take the next one while I pull them up?
How can we establish a well-based education experience for refugees? Rania, do you want to speak to that on the basis of the schools that you've been working with as Jusoor?
Yeah.
I can also offer thoughts.
Yep. So refugees, it's important to think about them at different stages of their education mission, and then countries that they're in as well. At Jusoor, we work with the youngest of children to start, and then we also work with older children. Let me start with the youngest of children. We've learned a lot through this experience and through this process. One is we learned that it's also important to think about the holistic education. What they're missing in these refugee communities is a lot of what you typically get in a family environment. So a lot of the how to engage in society, just basic principles around how to debate and discuss, and how to have calmness in a classroom. All of those things have been very, very important. So we do a lot about just basic, life skills. There's also just stepping back on basic things, like it takes a lot more I'm learning this with very young children myself. There's so many things we do to get people ready for preschool and early childhood education, basically holding a pen and all of that. And so we get kids that are 5 or 6 in school, and they are not even ready to do the very basic foundational things. And so we're learning in refugee communities that early childhood education, that preschool period, is probably even more important than what we talk about in more developed communities where things are safer. So we're making quite an investment in that as well. And then, of course, all the psychosocial support. We've had to invest in that quite a bit because of what children are coming into the classrooms being ready to experience and being open to. So those are some of the things I've picked up as I've heard our own schools talk through it. We've also learned, though, that the group that's extremely important to spend time with are the older students. A lot of times these programs are focused on the really early children, getting them into school, getting them to basic literacy. But the group that has very few interventions are the high schoolers and university students. And oftentimes they have very low motivation to work. They need to go to school. Their motivation is to work and to help their families earn income and earn money. And it's a real shame because they've actually got a foundation of education. When they left their home countries, they'd made it all the way to middle school or high school. And so they had a foundation that they could build on and grow with. So it's about creating the right incentives for that group to get educated and finding the way to do that. And then also helping with sometimes the language. They're in different countries and the language is really hard. So Jusoor has had a very successful program with that age group. We've been doing brevet training where we've taken kids and we've done supplemental training on top of what they're getting in the school system and just helping them pass the brevet through extra language skills. We do this in Lebanon where the brevet system exists. So extra language skills and just reinforcements to what they're getting in the curriculum. And we've seen significant increases in pass rates as a result of that. And a certificate and a degree is game changing for someone's life. So those are some of the learnings we've had in our programs in Lebanon. Mona, what would you add to that?
Actually, I'm going to move us on to other questions because I'm seeing that there's a list so that we can address all of them. So this is a question from Hanny in the chat. I wonder why the focus of Generation has been on employment as opposed to entrepreneurship and helping young people start their own businesses. We very much believe that the world needs both, right? So the world needs programs that will train and place you in existing jobs as well as entrepreneurship programs. They're just very different skill sets in terms of what an organization provides. So for a train in place program, I mean, as the name suggests, right? So we go out, we pre-confirm job vacancies, we train you, we get you into the role, and so on. For entrepreneurship, there has to be support with building the business concept, whatever that may be, and support in finding the seed capital and marketing and you name it, right? Supply chain and so on. So it's a very different skill set. One thing that we are, particularly in the wake of COVID, now looking at is freelancing roles. There is a stark reality that the number of job vacancies has gone down dramatically across the world for full-time jobs. So for example, in Europe, they've gone down 30 to 50%, even for tech roles. All right, so one of the things that we're seeking to support our learners to do is to successfully freelance while they are waiting for their full-time job. So we're dipping our toe, but in a very limited way with regards to entrepreneurship. So moving on to the next question, what's the most important thing you look at when evaluating the impact of your work in the long term? It's about changing someone's life, right? How can you take someone's life from one trajectory and literally lift it and put it on another one? For me, the most moving moments are graduations. Like, I'm guaranteed to cry at every single graduation, even when it's online. Because often our learners haven't had something that they can share with their children, with their family, to say, look, I've achieved this. Like, I'm going to be able to provide for you. I remember one of our cohorts in Brazil. For the first time, one of our graduates, she was excited about the job, but she was more excited about the health insurance because she was going to be able to have a surgery that her child needed. And so this is, those moments are worth all of the struggles that we experience, because you just see the look in someone's eye and you see them holding and hugging their child, and you know that their life has changed.
I love that, Muna. And one thought I have for the group is it's really easy to feel those moments early on when you start something, because you're so close to the programs. You're building them from scratch. You're in there in the trenches with the teams and with the recipients. As the organization tends to grow, you often are looking at it through the context of numbers and spreadsheets, and you get a little further away from the individuals. And it's just a reminder that it's worth finding ways to stay deeply plugged in, because there's nothing more moving than those stories and more motivating. And so just one of my own reflections as we've gone through Jusoor, the difference between the early days when we were literally meeting every single recipient and understanding their story, and then as it scaled, just the importance of keeping that connection.
Absolutely. There is another question from Rama. How does Generation help Arab students or professionals in the Arab world itself, especially when we face a lot of geopolitics, instabilities, and regulations that keep limiting our options? So as I mentioned, so Generation is not yet live in the region, but stay tuned. We very much hope to be. Essentially, the idea for Generation very much came out of what we were seeing during the Arab Spring. And so it is a mission of mine to make sure that we are in the region.
And I would encourage everyone on this call to take the inspiration from Muna and to think about the impact you can have on the region. I have seen so many individuals through the course of Jusoor's time that have made a tremendous difference on others in the Arab world, even when they haven't gone back directly. So there's a group that emerged out of a bunch of Jusoor scholarship recipients called the Syrian Youth Empowerment Group. And that group has helped close to, I think 50 students now go off and study at top universities around the world, and helped find scholarships and create scholarships. Many of you have been involved in seeding entrepreneurship and helping fuel entrepreneurship. And so, just think about the role you can play and the inspiration you can take from this to make a big difference to others in the region.
Absolutely. We have another question in the chat. What motivated you when you started, and what motivates you now to proceed with everything you know about the small and systemic barriers? For those of you who have read Letter from a Birmingham Jail, the great Dr. Martin Luther King, so he had been jailed after a protest or a march, and he was writing on scraps of paper, right? Because he wasn't given whole sheets of paper, and he wrote, "I am here because injustice is here," and that has always been very powerful to me. We do this work because the world is filled with injustice. It is tragic, but it is true. And the injustice is greatest against those who face the most systemic barriers. And so what we do with our privilege, what we do with our efforts, has to be focused on making a dent in that injustice. Through whichever way we do it, right? Rania has described the way that she seeks to do this. I'm describing the way that I seek to do this, but that's what we have to do systematically. And it's very much about looking at your corner of the world and figuring out how you can begin to enable someone who is facing a barrier or a bias and breaking it. So these are the questions I see. Let me see if there's anything else I've missed.
I think, Mona, that might be a really good place to end us in this conversation. It's such an empowering concept. And again, it brings us back to exactly where we started. There are so many causes in the world around us that need our help. And it's very easy to sit back and think these are so entrenched, they're so systemic, that it's very hard to see change. There's geopolitical forces at play here. There's global institutions trying to make a difference and they're struggling. And so what can we do? And you have described the work you've done over the course of your career, and it is having a profound impact on the world around you and for outcomes. And I've had the chance to experience that at a small scale through the work we're doing through Jusoor. And it is inspiring to me every day to think about the individuals we've touched and the multiplier effect that they will have on people around them. And so I hope you all leave with that thought and that perspective, which is we can absolutely make a difference on these incredible injustices that exist around the world. And you have tools that you might not have known existed before you sat in on this call, in that you can do this through private sector work. You can do it through nonprofit work. You can do it at a small scale and just get started and then see the impact and scale it. And hopefully you've all thought about and learned different tools and levers you have to start small and go very big and have a big impact. But hopefully you'll all find a deeper way to influence the world around you and walk away with more inspiration. So Mona, any thoughts you want to close with from your points of view or perspective? Anything else you'd want to share?
Just to say thank you. I recognize the tremendous resilience that is in the Jusoor community, and just massive respect for that. And Rania, always a pleasure to be with you, and thank you so much for this invitation.
Thank you, Mona. I mean, I am filled with so much more hope and a sense of possibility and potential, and I'm going to go take that into my day and in the weeks ahead. So thank you for filling us all with that, Mona. And thank you all for joining us, and look forward to see all the great outcomes that come out of this discussion and conversation. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.